Okay, so picture this. Deep in a cave near the Dead Sea, archaeologists find this fragment of papyrus, literally no bigger than a postage stamp. It's called 7Q5, and for decades, nobody knew what it was. But what if? What if that tiny scrap is the oldest piece of the New Testament ever found?
Right? That's the huge question at the heart of this whole thing. And today, we're going to play detective. We're going to follow the clues piece by piece and see if this little artifact could actually force us to rethink everything we know about when the Gospels were written. All right, so before we get into the big controversy, let's just get the basic facts straight. What exactly is this object that's causing all the fuss? So here's the rundown. This thing was found in Cave 7 at Qumran, so it's a legit Dead Sea Scroll. It's written in ancient Greek, not Hebrew, and man, is it small. We're talking just a handful of letters you can even see. For years, it was just this unsolved puzzle because those letters didn't seem to match any known text. But that all changed. Thanks to the work of a scholar named Karsten Peter Thiede, this forgotten fragment suddenly became one of the most hotly debated artifacts in the world. He looked at this tiny piece of papyrus and made a claim that sent absolute shockwaves through the academic community. I mean, think about that. To say that this unidentified Dead Sea Scroll fragment was a piece of the New Testament, that was beyond bold. If he was right, the implications would be absolutely massive. But, you know the saying, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And Thiede believed he had it. He built this incredible case using a combination of three really technical disciplines. You can think of these as his forensic toolkit for cracking this ancient code. So let's look at each one. So, how in the world do you identify a whole passage from just a few scattered letters? Well, Side's argument was you have to reconstruct the original page it came from. And his first tool for that is something called stichometry. It's basically a way to reverse engineer an ancient document. You measure the letters, you figure out the spacing, and from that, you can calculate how many letters would have fit on a single line of the original scroll. It's like rebuilding a puzzle with only one piece. So Thiede did the math and figured out the original lines must have been about 20 to 23 letters long. Then he took the text from the Gospel of Mark and typed it out, fitting it into that grid. And that's when he saw something amazing. Letters on one line seemed to line up perfectly with letters on the line below it, like the word Chi sitting right on top of the letter's knees. He argued that the odds of that happening by sheer chance were just astronomical. But here's where he hit a wall, a big one. Even with that cool alignment, the standard version of Mark 653 was just a little bit too long. It didn't quite fit his 20-letter line. The puzzle piece was just the wrong shape. So what did he do? He proposed a pretty daring solution. He suggested that this super early copy of Mark was actually missing a three-word phrase, epi ten gen, which just means onto the land. You take that one phrase out and suddenly, boom, the text fit his grid like a glove. But wait, can you just take words out? Well, Thiede's answer was yes, and he had a scientific reason for it. He pointed to a really common type of scribal mistake called parablepsis. It's when a scribe's eye accidentally jumps from one word to a similar-looking word later on, skipping everything in between. He argued the scribe's eye just skipped from the E in epi to the E in ace. And since the Dead Sea Scrolls are famous for having these unique little variations, he said this was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Okay, so the text fits the grid now. But this next part is where the story gets really dramatic. Theda moved on to his star witness, the positive identification of a single damaged letter that could make or break his entire case. Seriously, everything came down to one tiny fleck of ink. If it was one letter, the fragment couldn't possibly be Mark. But if it was another letter, his theory would become incredibly powerful. So here's the deal. To the naked eye, the letter looks like an iota followed by an alpha. No good. But for the text to be from the Gospel of Mark, that letter has to be a nu, the Greek N, to spell the word auton. For decades, this was the reason nobody ever thought this fragment could be from Mark. But Thiede didn't just use his eyes. He brought in the big guns, a scanning laser microscope. And what he claimed to find was incredible. In a peer-reviewed scientific paper, he announced he'd found microscopic traces of the horizontal crossbar of that nu, a detail that was totally invisible before. For him, this was it. This was the smoking gun. And that high-tech discovery, that tiny little line of ink, it all led to this number, 1. This was his checkmate. He took the sequence of letters from the fragment, including his controversial nu, and fed it into a massive computer database containing all known ancient Greek literature. The computer searched through everything and came back with a single hit. One match in all of antiquity, the Gospel of Mark. It felt like mathematical proof.
So you've got a text that fits perfectly, a microscopic clue, and a 1 in a million computer match. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. The wider world of biblical scholarship took a look, and they weren't quite convinced. Now we have to look at the rebuttal.
So the academic community started to re-examine Theot's work, asking a really important question. What if the forensic tools were good, but his interpretation of what he saw was, well, wrong? And piece by piece, critics started to poke holes in the case. First, the Israel Antiquities Authority did their own scans with even better technology and reported they couldn't find any trace of that news crossbar. Ouch. Then, other scholars pointed out that if you're allowed to just omit a phrase, like Thides did, you could just as easily make the fragment fit a passage from Homer's Odyssey. And maybe most importantly, that one match from the computer, that only works if you accept the disputed nu to begin with. Without it, the whole thing falls apart. It was a circular argument. So you have to wonder, why was this debate so fierce? Why did people care so much about this tiny, tattered scrap of papyrus? Well, because the stakes weren't just about winning an academic argument. They were about rewriting history itself.
Okay, this is why it matters so much. Most scholars think the Gospel of Mark was written around 70 AD, but the settlement at Qumran was destroyed in 68 AD, so any scroll found in that cave has to be older than that. Thide went even further, dating the actual handwriting style on the fragment to around 50 AD. If he was right, that would place a written copy of the Gospel of Mark within 10 or 15 years of Jesus' crucifixion. It would mean it was written and circulating while eyewitnesses were still alive. It would be a complete game changer for the timeline of early Christianity. In the end, the mystery of 7Q5 really pushes us to ask a bigger question. The fragment is still this tantalizing what if, but the story of the investigation, that's a powerful lesson in just how difficult it is to piece together the ancient past. It shows us how science, debate, and skepticism all work together, one tiny, controversial fragment at a time.